So happy to see you. Thank you so much for finding time to talk to me. I'm super excited to hear about your amazing transition into Facebook team. And
Mhm.
it's been a few years since we had our last French vanilla at Timmy's. So let's just begin by, if you could tell me a little bit more about your transition into like American society. Do you feel that it's anyhow different from the Canadian society? How long did it take you finding your first job and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, I can't believe it's been over a little over 2 years since I moved to the States. I think it was quite a transition, even though Canadian American cultures, you would think it's similar. But I think for me, obviously, leaving a country is still always a different experience, right? And moving in and adjusting and starting life back to square one, it was quite a change. Leaving my family and friends, and also, part of me was concerned, like, is my career going to be on
Right.
hold? And, do I have to
Yeah.
start all over again? But I think overall, it was a seamless process, and it took me kind of like 6 months. When I moved here first, I took 6 months to myself, and then I started working within 6 months.
Um,
So yeah, that was a good timeline. I gave myself 6 months to adjust and kind of went job hunting, and then like started my usual life and routine here in the States.
all right. So during these 6 months, were you actively applying for jobs, or were you just kind of, taking care of other things before getting back to the work field?
No, my first six, honestly, I didn't start applying until like maybe my fifth month, and within a month, actually, I was applying. Surprisingly, I would say my job search was less than a month. Okay, less than a month, and to be honest, I was concerned initially. I was concerned because I made some personal life changes, and I was concerned if that was going to impact my job search.
Right.
But I did. My first 5 months, I just took time for myself to adjust, and even when I started, to be honest, I wasn't really aggressive because I thought to myself, I could take another month or two for myself. But it
Right.
just happened like within a month, things moved and I started
Mhm.
working again.
Okay, so in terms of your job hunting, were you only applying online, or did you have to also go out and do networking? What was your success formula?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, like to be honest, as much as I always try to think outside the box, and my plan for myself was like eventually if I don't hear, depending on how things go, I was going to go out and network. But initially, I think it was more of like setting up informational chats with people on LinkedIn,
Right.
and then getting a feel of like where I see myself in,
Hmm.
what industry am I going to pursue. I mean, I knew I was always going to be in my field because I've been
Right.
doing talent
Yeah.
acquisition recruitment.
Yeah.
But I think even in states, like again, recruitment again, it's such a broad term. Like you have agency recruiting, right, versus
Right.
in-house recruiting.
Yeah.
One thing for me, there was a lot of agency recruiting opportunities, but I knew like I wanted to be
In-house recruiter.
acquisition because I've always been doing that in Canada. So I think yeah, for me it was more of like applying for jobs online and applying for jobs on LinkedIn, and also having those informational conversations with people on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn to kind
Hmm.
of get a sense of the American industry,
Okay. I see.
industry.
All right, sounds great. And in terms of the application process, would you say that the American resume is anyhow different from the Canadian resume? Did you have to adjust, and make any changes once you relocated, or is it like the same thing?
To be honest, I don't think there was a significant difference in the resume part. I think it was just minor changes, right? But like formatting wise, content wise, it's just the way you would put in your resume in Toronto or in Canada. Um, I don't think there was a significant difference in there. But I do think like with America, the one thing I will say, which is a plus, is opportunity. Like specifically to New York, it's like
Right,
hub of opportunities, right?
right.
So there's a lot more opportunities. So your chances, I don't want to say higher, but in a way, yes, they are at a given time.
Okay. Just because you guys have more jobs in New York, right? It's like a very
Yeah, like I mean, I think it depends on the timing too. But like when I was looking out for roles at that point, there was a lot of opportunities, right?
Mhm.
Although like I was picky and choosy in terms of what I wanted, but I do think in terms of opportunities, there was like quite a bit. And I think being in New York, yeah, it's if we had to compare New York to Toronto, I think the opportunities are much higher here.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
kind of, feeling jealous now with all this like economic crisis. We barely have any postings coming up. So,
I know.
maybe I would have to start thinking about, making the same transition at some point. But,
But I
um,
do I do think though this is a tough time in general. Like I do think overall, like the whole pandemic and COVID
yeah,
has impacted the job market, regardless of where you're at. So I do think that did play a significant role. I mean, we have 6 million people in America right now that are out of jobs, right? So I do think like right
six
now is a
million, you said.
yeah, 6 million people that have apparently as of today that was the stats have been applying for employment insurance because they're out of jobs, right? So I think like that's a significant number that I
Yeah.
don't think anybody has ever witnessed in the American history in a while, but I think right now is just a unique timeline regardless for the world.
That's crazy. It's like six times more than what we have here in Canada. So,
Yes.
maybe I'll still stay here for a
Yeah.
while. And you've also mentioned that, yeah, in terms of the recruitment process in states, they also do the check of your immigration status or something like that, and you will have more chances to be successful and to be invited to the interview if you are a permanent resident or a citizen. Am I correct? Or
Yes. I mean, I guess it depends, right? But ideally, yes, you have to be legally authorized to work in the States, depending on what that looks like. It could be a permanent residency or citizenship or a work permit. But ideally, you would have to have, you have to be legally authorized to work in the States. That's definitely a factor that takes into consideration. There are
Mhm.
exceptions depending on the role, depending on the company, but in general, yes.
Okay. All right. And do you know if American employer is willing to consider someone who lives in Canada? If they as far as I know, if you're a Canadian citizen, you can enter states as many times as you like. I'm not too sure if you can actually work there, but do you know if American employer will be willing to give the Canadian citizen a chance to work in states, and if they ever, in your experience, sponsored someone coming from Canada, to work in states?
Yeah. I think this is a tough one to answer because from my experience, I do see that there is a need and demand for talent no matter where they're from, as long as they're, again, I think like specific to like, for example, I've done tech recruiting and engineers,
Right.
uh,
Hmm.
companies are willing to sponsor, right?
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
and for like other specific tech roles. But I don't know personally, depending on the field. I think again, companies, it varies within companies. It depends on their internal processes and guidelines. But ideally, yes, I do think depending on the field, companies are willing to sponsor. But I don't know if that's a common thing. I don't know if it's
Hmm.
very like prominent across
Hmm.
companies.
Okay, but sometimes, in some cases, they're willing to
Yes,
maybe
yes,
help out and
yeah,
sponsor. Yeah,
sponsor, yeah,
I
depending
see.
on the team and depending on the company, yeah.
And do you generally meet a lot of Canadians at the American workplace, or you're more of the, unique case?
I'll be honest with you. I've met Canadians, not maybe so many, but I've met three so far. And I always get excited to meet like my Canadian fellows. But yeah, and I don't know what, like to be honest, I don't even know if we didn't get into that conversation of like if they're
Beautiful.
permanent residents or if they're dual citizens, right? But
Mm.
I've encountered at least three Canadians in my workplace overall. Throughout my experiences since I started.
Okay. And would you say that the Canadian experience helped you finding a job faster in States? Like, do they validate this experience, or you kind of have to
Yeah.
start from scratch?
No, absolutely. I think in America, what I feel is I think any experience is valuable, right? As long as you have the experience, you have the skill set. Sorry,
Yeah.
and obviously, you have to be successful in the interview process. I definitely do think that. Like, I don't even, I think in America they do value experience in general. Like, even if it's
Hmm.
Canadian or in
Mm.
other country, as long as you have the right credentials to do the job
Oh,
and you do the right things, I
right.
think yes, it's definitely valuable.
Okay. All right. Sounds great. And in terms of the, how in Canada we do the reference check, right? And sometimes we call the employers, like the referees overseas, to get the
Yeah,
feedback on the new hire. Is that something that happened to you as well with your first employer?
yeah.
Yeah, they did call
So
to just to Canada.
Yeah, so the reference checks is standard. So it's interesting because they look back, depending on the company, they look back
Yeah.
at your employers in your past 7 years, but I think they reach out to the most three recent ones. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's the same process. They will call your like, and I think I don't even know if that takes longer than usual. I think it doesn't take that long. They were pretty quick. The background checks process was pretty quick turnaround. But yes, that is a process. They do your reference checks in Canada. Like,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, just the last question before we get into the interesting part where, we will all hear about your experience working on Facebook. But how in Canada, the diversity thing is really huge, and that's like one of the major work principles with any of the Canadian employer. Is that something that is also being apply to the American workplace, or have you ever maybe dealt with discrimination or unfair attitude based on the person's origins?
Yeah. I think diversity is a big thing right now overall in every work
Okay.
culture. From my experience, I think diversity is something every company I've been in valued. I mean, prior to this, I worked at a startup that focuses only on diversity recruitment, right? So it plays a significant role in the workplace, I would say. Um, but diversity in America is quite different from diversity in Canada. And what I mean by that is, in
Mm-hmm.
diversity in Canada referred to like, indigenous
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
population, but diversity in America is um, African American, Hispanic, Latino.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so African, Hispanic, Latino, that comprises of the ethnic, I guess, diverse groups in the States.
Okay. Okay,
Um,
so there is a slightly
and
different focus. Okay.
yeah, and the
Mm-hmm.
Native Americans,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just the differences in the population, like that, the groups that are considered diverse.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's a big part of every
And
work culture here in
okay.
America.
All right. I'm very glad to hear that. And speaking about the Facebook experience, I'm so thrilled to hear like every single detail. I know that you cannot be too much specific, but just starting off, and if you could share a little bit about your recruitment experience with Facebook. Was it anyhow different from any other employer? What did you like about it? And how soon did you get a call from Mark Zuckerberg to hear that you're hired?
No, absolutely. I think my experience overall was fantastic as a candidate, and now as an employee, even better. But I do think, like, overall, um, I would say around yeah, definitely four interviews, one in person, one, and the rest I would consider them as like digital interviews, right? Like remote, because people that I was interviewing with were in different locations.
Right.
So that was definitely, I don't want to say that's different from my interviews in the past. Yeah, but in Canada, most of my interviews have always been in person, right? So that was definitely
Right.
um, different. Overall, I think it was a seamless process, and my entire recruitment process took roughly, I would say, a month and a half. Things move fast. Like one of our two key missions, like focus on impact and move fast. And I truly felt that in my process. Um, but yeah, I mean, it. I'm here now, and
Yeah. What else can you say? You're there. Okay. And how did you prepare for this interview? Were you nervous? Were you reading the biographies of all of the company's CEOs? Like,
yeah.
was there anything special? What was your success formula, which you think helped you getting on board with Facebook?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I've always been like a learner, like always curious. And I think no matter what company you apply for, and in my entire career journey, I think I've done this for every company that I've applied for. I always do research on the company. I always look through the mission. I look at what initiatives the company's doing out there, just to gain some insight to help me like learn about the culture, learn about the company, and also like potentially does that align with my personal values? Do I see myself in this company? And if yes, why so? Right? Like,
Yeah.
um, kind of connecting the dots and to be able to tell my story and why I'm passionate about being in a company. So I think that part was nothing different for me. I think even going to this interview, I mean, no matter how prepared you are, personally, even being in HR, it's funny because
Yeah.
being in acquisition, being in having so many happens. I think even now, like when you do an interview, there's always going to be a little bit of like, nervousness.
Right,
But
right,
I
right.
think I think I didn't really. I mean, to be honest, the only prep I did is like having knowledge of Facebook's mission, what they do, and all the great things that are doing. Also, just for my personal knowledge. But in terms of prep, I do think like I think you just have to be yourself, be authentic, right?
Mhm.
And it can be easy to be nervous in an interview, but
Right.
I also think like keeping in mind like it's just a conversation. You're just talking about yourself. You're just
Right.
talking about your experiences, and I think as long as you have that in your mind, I feel like it helps you guide those conversations versus like,
Yeah.
oh my, this is an interview process. I'm, like I don't know if I'm saying not saying the right things. So to be honest, there's no like even after an interview, I've never it's hard for me to say like, oh wow, like I did great, because I do think like even when I had my conversation, me felt like, oh my god, like I don't know how I did, like I don't even know,
Yeah.
but I just leave it up to what's meant to be will be. And I think my goal in no matter, and I think this
Yeah.
is a goal for anybody in the job search, like you can prepare so much, you
Yeah.
best, and just be yourself
Yeah.
and bring your authentic self during the interview process, and that's it. Like
So, what advice would you give to someone who is dreaming to work at Facebook, right? What should they do? What kind of strategy you maybe can recommend? Any kind of advice.
yeah, I think my advice to honestly would be general for no matter what company you want to work for, right? Like I think definitely being at a big brand is something amazing, but I do think like if you want something, if you want a job, no matter where you want it, you have to do, I don't want to say all the right things, you have to do the best that you can to know you've done the right thing. So I mean, obviously one thing is you have to know your skill sets. Do you know what you could bring to an organization, right? Your experience. And
Mm-hmm.
then
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. It just had like a sub question. So, what kind of qualities, like, or what kind of things, the Facebook really appreciates in in the applicants? What are they, the
yeah,
top things they're
yeah.
looking for?
I think overall, I mean, internally, I mean, we want the best of the best, right? But
Right.
I think even no matter what company I've worked for, we always want the best of the best, right?
Right.
But I also think to be, everybody comes in with a different skill set. Every person and individual has a different strength that they can bring in. I think it's about how you articulate yourself to tell the employer
Mm-hmm.
what strengths you have that you can bring in on the team, right? And then how you answer your questions.
Mm-hmm.
And just being yourself, being your, honesty, integrity, transparency, I think that's valuable, right? Like you can tell if somebody's being honest about their experiences or their, like being your authentic self. I think it's definitely important. Um, I also think being able to think outside the box, I think that's important, right? Being creative, like in terms of because at any given point you have to be ready for any question that may come across, right? So you can be thrown off by a question that you're not prepared for, but how you answer that and how you
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
recover from that situation is key, because that
Right.
shows like you're able to kind of work around challenges, as an individual, like
Mm-hmm.
you
So it
like
seems like you guys, as a part of your interview process, I know that you cannot, obviously say too much, but you're probably doing a lot of this kind of, I don't know, maybe case studies or something like that, trying to see who has this creative thinking. So that'll be one of the values, which
yeah,
will
absolutely. I think
be. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think it's ingrained, like in the interview process, obviously it's ingrained, like overall, there are certain key qualities people are looking for, but I think it also depends on the team and the manager. And again, depending in any company, every team has a specific thing that they're looking for, right? But yeah, the interview process is designed in such a way that you're testing on all these abilities, right? But I also think that's a common thing across many companies that I've worked at least from my experiences, you
Mm-hmm.
know, um, you just have to be yourself, be able to relate your stories, I mean, sorry, your experiences, relate your experiences to the job that you're applying for, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, and also showing value, because obviously
Mm-hmm.
every company company wants to hire an employee that's going to bring value to the team. So what is
Right.
it that you bring in differently from somebody else? I think
Mhm.
being able to understand that, reflect, and being able to articulate that is important.
Mhm.
And then being confident. I think confidence is an important piece, right? Not being overconfident. Uh, I think that's another thing. A lot of candidates sometimes can be overconfident, and I think that could be a flaw too. But I think
Right.
just being confident in your skill set, confident enough to be able to tell your story to your employer, to an employer, to a potential employer, and yeah, and I think that's it. And honestly, I just think like you do your best and you hope the
Or the
best.
best. All right. Just
That's
the
important.
last question. Yeah, sorry, Nilufar. Just the last question about Facebook.
Mhm.
So how would you say the Facebook culture and work environment different from other companies you worked at? What did you like the most? Ever since you joined the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the people, definitely so far, I've been grateful to be working with a great team. Everybody's super supportive. I have an amazing manager that I'm grateful for. Again, being able to be yourself and having those open conversations with your team members, I think that's fantastic. I think Facebook as a culture overall is people is on top of mind, and that's truly you can see that through the internal culture and the value that Facebook creates for its people, which means like we have a lot of internal like benefits like free food,
Yeah.
have certain flexibilities as an employee, and that just tells us that what our Facebook truly cares about their people. So I think
Mhm.
in terms of
So
culture,
in terms of flexibility, sorry, just to kind of you've mentioned that you guys had an opportunity to work from home even before this COVID crazy thing started, right? That was one of the things. Is there
yeah,
something else related to flexibility?
yeah, I think that, the remote, work. I think that's a common trend in America right now. Like in general, most companies are, willing to allow employees to work remotely, but depends on the team and depends how many days, right? Like it's not like an everyday remote role. You're not remote every day. But now during the COVID situation, that's quite different. Everybody's remote, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that is definitely a flex perk as an employee that we have. And definitely, Facebook overall, like I said, it values its employees, and even during this time, it values community. And I think in terms of our products, like again, we're doing great things. We're bringing the world closer. Even during this time, like people are using Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram to connect with people and family that during this time of crisis even more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I do think overall they even have like a mission that's beyond the people internally. I think what they're doing out in the world is great. So I do think that as an employee, I value that as well, right? But I do think overall, yeah, people are on top of mind. Work life balance is on top of mind. So I think that's what resonates with me as an employee. Like that's something I value a lot here.
And during the typical staff meeting, will Mark be present there? Have you met with him, or he's like, like a ghost manager?
No, no. So I mean, we have like, well, now I mean, I've seen him in person during a Q&A when I went to Menlo Park, California. But he's based out of the Bay Area. But yeah, we do see him. Like we have Q&A live seminars with him, so we are able to communicate with him virtually, but not to the extent that not like a one-on-one. But we're able to ask questions that we have. But yeah, I mean, he's a genius.
He's there. He's there.
Yeah.
He actually exists.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's awesome. That's great. And just the last question to wrap up our interview. Just, I was kind of curious if maybe you could tell us what will be one or two major differences of the American culture or American workplace from Canada, and what are the things that you're missing about Canada that are not in States for you?
Okay, great. I'll be honest with you. I miss Canada. I do miss Canada from the standpoint of other things like healthcare, right? I do miss my family, my
Yeah,
friends,
that's obvious. Yeah.
but I do not miss the Canadian workplace. Absolutely not.
No.
I do think if I had to compare, the American workplace culture is something I prefer,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's quite
Mm-hmm.
different. In the stand, it's quite different from certain things in the sense like the
Flexibility or something else?
yeah, like the things they encourage, even vacation, like they encourage PTO, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
people travel more often here. And I think that's a common trend in Canada now too. But I back a couple of years ago, I don't remember that being a trend where people were encouraged to take time off. Like you have your paid time off, but you
Mm-hmm.
know, get so consumed with work, like you don't want to take some,
Right.
you don't want to be sick. But here
Right.
it's like if you need a sick day, you're sick. If they encourage that. Like if you
Mm.
need to take days off as a part of your whatever days are allocated for
Any
you,
employer or your current employer, would you say that that's a trend?
I think that's a trend across most employers, to be honest, right? And I do think work from home, like I said, not across all the companies I've worked from. Sorry, in terms of all the I've worked for 3 companies since I've been here, and
Mm-hmm.
all the companies have the option to work from home as needed, based on the team and based on things. So I thought that that was different. In Canada, I did work for one employer that had the option work from home, but I
Right.
knew that it's not a common thing across other companies.
Right.
Uh, yeah, so I definitely think like I mean, and then the opportunities, I think the opportunities are endless. The opportunities for growth and advancement is much higher, I would say, in the States from my experience so far.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, those would be the
More
three things.
opportunities.
uh, More opportunities, yeah.
Okay. And so what are these things that you're missing in Canada if if it's so great in States? Flexibility, sick days, work from home, um, career advancement. What are the things which you're missing?
I mean, to be honest, I mean, at the end
Except
of the
for
day,
family. Obviously you miss family and friends.
really. I don't want to say I miss anything in Canada, like specific to my work experiences. I definitely don't miss anything. I do think every experience I've had in my life, I do think every experience in my life is valuable overall, right? To shape who I am as a person and for me to be where I am or where I'm supposed to be. I think all my experiences in Canada were valuable, but I do think in terms of if I had to look back and if I had the option to work in Canada, I wouldn't say no to it, to be honest, depending, right?
Mhm.
I do think I've come to a point where I'm happy working in the States. And in the long run, I mean, I'll be honest with you at this point. There was a time I thought about like, would I ever go back to Canada? Because at the end of the day, I am a Canadian citizen. If I
Right, right.
years down the drain, 10 years down the drain, if I want to move back to Canada, that's an option for me. But the question is, do I want to? And I'll be honest with you, at this point, the answer would be, I don't think so. I don't think I would want to go back to Canada.
Okay.
Except
All
for the
right.
my family and friends, that's a different thing. But in general, like, yeah.
Yeah, well, we miss you here too.
Oh,
Your smile,
stop.
your energy, and yeah, just letting people like you go and live in a different country. I feel like it's a huge loss for the economy,
I
to
know.
be honest.
But
Yeah,
change is good. I think change is good. I think it's always good to like take a leap of faith and try different things. I think when you're young and you have no
right.
responsibilities, I think you have the opportunity to take a risk and a leap of faith and create your journey and do what's best for you. I also think you're doing great things, Julia. And the last time we worked together, and I definitely enjoy and cherish those moments. But I'm very proud of the things that you're doing. I mean, I've always, to be honest, I've always wanted to be in a position where I help people, and I think I am in that position, and I've always been like being in talent acquisition. You're helping people
Right,
find jobs. You're helping shape people's careers, right?
right.
Um, but I do think like what you're doing kind of takes me back to when I was working at a non for profit again, helping
Yeah.
immigrants and giving them advice and how to find the right job for them in the market. I think you're doing great things, and I truly wish you all the success, and I'm pretty sure you're gonna be famous one day, and don't forget me when
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. I won't mind that. But yeah, most importantly, my goal is to help, and give immigrants the hope that they'll be successful wherever they go. Will that be Canada? Will that be States? So I'm pretty sure they'll be very curious, to hear some details of our conversation today. So once again, thank you, and we're done with the official part of the interview.
thank you so much.